Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar, Discover Colombia, Business Opportunities for British Companies. We're sorry we were delayed a few moments due to technical reasons before starting this afternoon, but it is a great pleasure to be with you now to discover the opportunities that British companies can find in what is truly an exciting Latin American destination. My name is Adam Marshall. I'm the Executive Director for Policy and External Affairs at the British Chambers of Commerce in London, and it is my pleasure to be your host for this afternoon's webinar. I'm pleased as well to be joined by Andrew Wright. Andrew is the Chief Executive Officer of UK Colombia Trade, which is accredited to the British Chambers of Commerce Global Network and is our partner in providing businesses from Birmingham and Bradford and Brighton straight through to Bogota with the support and the services that they need. Just to say something about the BCC Global Network, we are in the process of building with Chambers of Commerce here in the UK and Chambers of Commerce and business groups across the world a true global trading network that is business to business. We're very proud that UK Colombia Trade and Andrew are part of that network, and we're very proud to be able to help British companies access markets as exciting and dynamic as Colombia. Indeed, I was absolutely blown away when I visited Colombia myself about 2 years ago at its openness, at its entrepreneurialism, and at its appetite for doing business with Britain. So lots of opportunities to be had. On that note, I'd like to introduce Andrew Wright, Chief Executive Officer of UK Colombia Trade. Andrew has well over a decade's experience working in both Colombia and Ecuador, so he knows the region both personally and professionally very strongly. He's worked in both banking and other sectors, so he's been both a business person and a facilitator of business in this part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Andrew.
So to start off, as you can see on your screen at the moment, Colombia was established in 2013 as one of the 19 priority emerging markets for UKTI as part of the Overseas Business Network Initiative in partnership with the British Chambers of Commerce. Basically, why? Colombia is a market which has close to 48 million inhabitants. It's grown at over 4% consistently over the last 10 to 15 years. Even despite the challenges in 2008-2009, Colombia registered positive growth. It's a market which has brought a lot of its macroeconomic indicators under control with managed inflation. And in fact, the Ministry of Finance here, the equivalent to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Central Bank, have been consistently named as managing the strongest and best financial policy in the region. It's now the third largest economy in Latin America after Brazil and Mexico. It's recently overtaken Argentina, given a number of sort of the exchange rate issues and the contraction in the Argentinian economy. Argentina historically being one of the economic motors in the region, but Colombia has come fast on the outside and now overtaken Argentina in terms of the size of the economy and also in terms of the business culture, the openness and the attractiveness of doing business. As we mentioned, it's now #1 in Latin America in terms of ease of doing business. So setting up a company is very easy. Also, there's investment protection treaties in place with the UK. So it's a very attractive environment generally overall. It's a huge market. I think you can fit Spain, France and Portugal comfortably within Colombia. With a population of about 48 million, it just means that there's about a third of the country which is, Amazon rainforest and very light in terms of population. But Colombia's got 5 major cities with over 1 million inhabitants in each. Bogota as a city on its own, it's not quite the size of a Sao Paulo or a Mexico DF, but we've got about 9 million inhabitants in Bogota, closely followed by Medellin with about 3 million and Cali likewise. So slightly different to other countries in the market like Chile and Peru, where you have a very big and strong capital city and then small cities in the provinces. Colombia is more like Brazil and Mexico in terms of being a country of regions and cities. Despite the attractiveness of the market, an interesting stat is that the UK exports 8 times more to South Africa, which socio-demographically we see as very similar in terms of the size of the population, the distribution of age and economic classes in the country, and similar to Thailand. So we can't say because South Africa is on the same time zone or they speak English, it's easier. The UK exports 3 times more to Thailand than they do to Colombia. I think for historic reasons, and as Adam mentioned, some of the difficult past that Colombia's had, it's just been very low on the radar of British companies. If we can just progress through the slides. Basically, reflecting what I mentioned before, what's attractive about Colombia, what is different about Colombia? You've got a booming youth sector, different to Europe where you've got an aging population. Colombia's a Catholic country, with a very strong sort of young dynamic market, a growing youth segment. And that youth segment is increasingly internationally aware on social networks, on internet, being educated internationally and coming back to Colombia and demanding, international standards of products and services. It's the second largest Spanish-speaking population in Latin America. In Brazil, it's obviously Portuguese. So that's fantastic news for anybody who wants to do business from Mexico down. You have a huge population that speaks Spanish. Aside from Brazil, and Colombia is the second largest Spanish-speaking population in the region. And the middle class is forecast to double in the next 15 years. So we're talking about increasing disposable income, increasingly demanding consumer base. And as we'll see later, that's presenting huge opportunities in areas such as financial services, in terms of retail goods and luxury goods. So just to put it into context, it's a sizable market with a growing dynamic youth base. Let's just carry on. To support Colombia's internationalization, they've had over the last few years a very proactive process of signing free trade agreements with a number of countries around the world. Colombia now has in force a free trade agreement signed with EU and also with the USA, Canada, and they've got a number of other free trade agreements under negotiation at the moment, such as Japan and South Korea. Also, Colombia is in the process of becoming an OECD country, so very much following the path of Chile and Mexico before us in the region, to moving from an emerging economy to an emerged economy, a more developed country with increasingly open and international standards for doing business. Part of the internationalization, if we move on to the next slide, Colombia is one of the founding partners of a new trade bloc that's under negotiation at the moment, called the Pacific Alliance, which initially included as founding states Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, which, if you look at each of the markets on an individual basis, have their own interesting elements. But what we're seeing from British companies is that quite often they're looking at Central and South America as a region, and certainly Brazil is a unique case. So most companies look at Brazil because of the language and regulation very much on a unique basis, but there's a lot of synergies and a lot of integration happening between Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile. They've now merged the stock exchanges so that clients can trade across those 4 markets, and the vision is that there will be free movement of goods and people across those markets. So it will become, instead of a market like Colombia with 48 million, a population of 209 million, representing over half of total trade in Latin America. And in terms of GDP, it's 35% of Latin America's GDP. So I think it's important today we're talking about Colombia, but with the British Chambers of Commerce in Chile, Peru, and Mexico, we're providing increasingly integrated regional support to British exporters who are looking to trade across this very attractive and growing trade bloc. Moving on and trying to keep to the timescales, I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas where we're seeing major growth opportunities and a lot of activity and interest from British companies, both exporters and investors. At this stage, I would like to emphasize that there are a raft of opportunities not solely exclusive to these sectors, and obviously I would encourage you to contact your local chambers of commerce or contact us direct to go into more details. But given the time restrictions, I wanted to focus on a few main growth opportunities that exist in the market in terms of infrastructure, transport and water. Generally we call this infrastructure, social infrastructure as a whole. Oil, gas, renewable energy. We also have retail and luxury goods, which I alluded to earlier, and then financial and professional services. So going into a little bit more detail, infrastructure, the Colombian government is planning to spend about $100 billion into 2020, 2022. They've implemented new public-private partnership law to support that development plan. I think it's no secret with the violent and turbulent past in Colombia, previous governments haven't been able to undertake major infrastructure reforms and upgrades in the country that have been needed for many years. A lot of people quote the fact that it costs more to transport a container of goods from the Atlantic coast of Colombia to Bogota than it does to ship from the UK to the Colombian coast. So really, I think about 1% of GDP has been hamstrung due to the lack of good infrastructure. So at the moment, there's investment going into ports, rails, airports, roads. So across the board in terms of infrastructure, any companies, experts in that area, there's huge opportunities here. And to that extent, we have a specialist team here in the British Embassy where we're co-located. UKTI has a team that's organizing a trade mission to come to the Colombian Infrastructure Congress in Cartagena in November this year. So we'll send around this presentation afterwards. There are the contact details. Companies such as Arab, Atkins, McBain's, Cooper, Chapman Taylor, are all in the market and winning good business. So I would encourage any companies with interests in that sector to contact us direct. Moving on to oil and gas, it's very important to note that just yesterday, the Colombian state oil company Ecopetrol, which some of you might know, Petrobras in Brazil or Pemex in Mexico, Ecopetrol is the Colombian equivalent listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Yesterday, they announced the second offshore find so far this year. The Colombia produces about 1 million barrels a day. And you know, reserves onshore are dwindling, and the new Colombian government and the new chief executive of Ecopetrol are gambling or betting on, I wouldn't say gambling because it's a measured risk, on offshore development in the Caribbean basin off the Colombian coast, and also undertaking an exploration program on the Pacific coast. So we're doing a lot of activity. We're having a trade mission into Colombia in October. From a trade body in the oil and gas sector. It will be the second oil and gas trade mission to Colombia this year. So early stage development, but huge opportunities for companies who have perhaps been more familiar with Brazil and Mexico, with the Mexican oil and gas reforms undergoing at the moment. So we just want to raise the massive opportunities that are afoot in Colombia in oil and gas. Likewise, agribusiness. We recently launched some activities with the Colombian government at Milan Expo last month, and we're having a trade mission also coming to Colombia in August to a big trade fair. Colombia's got the third greatest arable land potential in Latin America. A bit like Brazil, the huge development that happened over the last 10 to 20 years in the plains of Brazil. Colombia has that potential, and now we're moving towards peace agreements with the guerrilla rebels in those arable areas. There's huge potential for agricultural growth. We're working with the UKTI agribusiness experts looking at precision agribusiness. We're looking at animal genetics, heavy machinery for the agricultural industry, working with companies such as JCB, who have their agricultural machinery here, FP Global from the Northwest, who are looking to provide machinery to the sugarcane market in the Cali region of Colombia. So Colombia, being close to the equator, has about 12 hours of sun every day, all year round, and perhaps some of the problems of Colombia have stemmed from the fact that it's a very fertile and plentiful agricultural market. So we're getting a lot of interest from UK firms in that area, and we have an expert here in UK Colombia Trade who attends those companies. In the retail segment, as I mentioned before, the Colombian consumer trends are very interesting. There's quite an Americanized trend towards shopping malls and shopping centers. Household wealth has risen by over 16%. A huge amount of the population has moved out of what we could say poverty levels into middle class. And this trend towards shopping and spending is remarkable. And shopping centers are springing up consistently in the major cities, but also in the secondary cities around the regions where there's an increasingly growing middle class youth population. And as the slide said, there's projects across about 43 different cities. So in retail, we're doing a lot of work in terms of food and drink. We're starting to get British cider, British real ale, cheeses, biscuits, all sorts of different products, but also in terms of fashion. If we move on to the next slide, higher end fashion, also high street fashion, are very, very successful here. The growth has been growing, has been very important over the last few years. And Bogota is now the second largest luxury market after Sao Paulo and Brazil, which a lot of people are astonished about. The size of the market is significant, with a lot more potential, and we've recently seen British brands such as Burberry, Cath Kidston, Hamleys, etc. looking at the market. Thomas Pink are launching soon. So it's an interesting segment, and with this growing trend of shopping malls and consumer disposable income, the Colombian peso, the currency, has devalued recently, which is a challenge for exporters of British quality goods. However, the demand is very high. We facilitate cooperation between British and Colombian businesses, UK Colombia Trade. We have sector-specific expertise in these areas that we've talked about. I haven't gone into detail, but financial and professional services, we're looking at a number of fintech opportunities for British firms. Lloyd's of London have just got approval to open a rep office here, and insurance is a very strong sector here. HSBC, Standard Chartered Bank are present. And in pharma, pharmaceutical sales are one of the largest export segments from the UK, with GlaxoSmithKline, AstraZeneca and Shire Pharmaceuticals already in the market. So we also work co-located with UKTI, who have experts in terms of transport, infrastructure, education, defense and security, and, if I'm not mistaken, mining. So, it's very important to know that we're integrated with those sector experts, and over the last 3 years, we've actually tripled the commercial resource available to support British exporters here from Bogota and into the regions. A sample of the work we're doing, just to close, is a case study of a company that recently engaged with UK Colombia Trade called MF Communications. It's a company working in the telecoms industry. The company heard about from their international trade advisors in the UK about the emergence of Colombia, and they wanted to find out more, and they came through the International Trade Advisor Network, which was referred to us as the on-the-ground support entity here in Bogota. We helped them with a list of companies that could be relevant to their product and services after understanding what they were looking for. And once we provided them with a sort of a warm shortlist of companies, we agreed a travel agenda for the business development manager of MF to come to the market. And we actually had our trade development manager accompany them, provide support in Spanish on the visits to Bogota and Medellin. And as you can see, the feedback from MF was very positive. having that level of support and being able to access and cut through some of the information and find the right types of contacts quickly. As a business-to-business entity, we have a team here of 8 people who all come from the private sector. So we have a fantastic network of contacts, and the idea is to provide good services as quick as possible. MF were here less than 6 months ago and have already received orders. So that's a sample, a small sample in one sector of the support that we've provided. So without further ado, I would like to perhaps pass back to Adam, if he could perhaps help us with the questions that have come through from the audience.
I'd be very happy to, Andrew. The first question that has come through that I wanted to raise with you is one of those myth-busting questions that so often we do get asked. Culturally, what is it like doing business in Colombia and doing business with Colombians? I think this question gets asked in part because British people aren't necessarily that familiar with either Colombian culture or the business culture, indeed, in Colombia.
Well, I think historically, Colombia has been quite aligned with Spanish culture. Over the last few years, what's been really interesting is that a lot of the British multinationals have no longer seen the need to have British or other nationality expats here because of the quality of the skills base and the quality of the Colombian professionals. And indeed, we find, and certainly 2 weeks ago we had the Lord Mayor of the City of London here. Later this year we're expecting a visit from George Osborne. Everybody who comes here finds Colombia as one of the most aligned markets culturally with the British way of doing business. The current president,
Andrew, if I can interrupt you there,
sorry?
When you say aligned, can you just unpack that for us a little bit more? I suppose, for some people that might come as a bit of a surprise that actually Colombian ways of doing business might be seen as familiar by people here in the UK.
Well, I think the only thing culturally that's quite different is perhaps time. Things do take time here. It's a very relationship-based culture, but the goodwill between Colombia and Britain actually goes back to the War of Independence against the Spanish, where British soldiers fought alongside the Colombians, and as a result there's a war memorial here on the field of the Battle of Independence in a British cemetery. So it goes back a very long way. The Colombian president studied and lived in the UK and is a real Anglophile, and that's across the board in terms of the Colombian government and business environment. So I think there's a high degree of transparency. There's a very strong legal framework which gives British companies a lot of reassurance. And to be honest, the Colombians make a huge effort when any Brits come to town to be on time. And generally the level of Spanish, certainly amongst, shall we say, the below 40s, is very strong. The older generation, perhaps the level of English isn't as good. So I think British exporters do need to be able and prepared to do business in Spanish. However, it is a very dynamic and entrepreneurial environment. British companies who come here and commit to Colombia, I don't think anybody's going to come on one trip and get business. I think MF was a specific exception. People have to invest the time and the effort to build the relationships and trust with Colombian business people, but it is surprisingly easy and professional in terms of doing business here in Colombia.
And do you get the sense that those who are able to invest the time, those who are able to build up those relationships, are seeing really strong sales on the back of that investment? Because so many British companies will go someplace once, and if they don't see immediate results, then they move on to pastures new. What you're saying is they need to persevere, but are the benefits just as great?
Yeah, well, I think we've got two core groups of companies. The big multinationals who have been here since the glory days of the 50s and 60s. We have companies here such as Shell, Diageo, GlaxoSmithKline, etc., who year on year are seeing fantastic growth and margins and seeing the results of being here for a long time. Then we're seeing a new wave of companies interested in the market. Recently, AMEC acquired Foster Wheeler and acquired an operation here, and they're investing heavily in growing their name and presence here. And a $9 billion, 40,000 employee business like AMEC, Foster Wheeler, are not finding it easy here because they're having to position their expertise. On the other hand, we have companies such as Arup, the engineering firm, who have now been coming here on and off for about 5 to 6 years, have established a physical presence here over the last 2 years, and now are winning very good contracts. So I think, yeah, you have to invest time and effort. A lot of British exporters obviously work with local Colombian distributors and agents, and we can help them identify good quality partners locally, and that helps with the local awareness and to really penetrate the market with the cultural awareness and knowledge that a Colombian agent or partner would have.
Well, let's come on to that point very briefly, because so often companies do worry about whom they might link up with in market in order to really sell their wares or their products or services in the market. Is that network of distributors really well developed? And UK Colombia Trade, I know, provides a service to link people to those individuals. Do you see British businesses surprised by just how good those links into market are?
Yeah, I think it's still patchy. For example, we're doing a lot of work with the retailers who are looking to franchise into Colombia, and you've got a relatively good but small base of franchise partners in Colombia if we compare to the retail strength of a market such as Chile or perhaps Panama. So there are very good partners, but perhaps not in the volume that British exporters would like to see as in other markets.
We've got to get them first so that you can help them find them.
Yes, that's correct. And for example, MF Communications, in terms of telecommunications, we were able to find out who the key players are in the market. And likewise, we help do due diligence on partners. I wouldn't like to say that people should be overly concerned about due diligence, but I do think in a market like Colombia, which is culturally different and with some of the past Colombia has had, it's really important, especially if you're looking at reputational risk, to get your partners and representatives right and to invest and take the time to make sure that you're either acquiring a business that has a good background or you're partnering with the right people. We have about 55 British companies as members in UK Colombia Trade. So amongst our board and membership base, we have a very strong group of partners who have been in the market for a long time, both British individuals and Colombians and other nationalities. And we try and provide a mentoring and support service through our network of contacts in UK Colombia Trade, through the embassy and the broader business environment, which I've been engaged with since the year 2000.
Brilliant, thank you. Another concern that comes up from both our audience and from British businesses in general when going into new markets, surprise, surprise, is getting paid. So many people express concerns when going into a new export market for the first time, that they might not receive payment for a shipment, that they might need very expensive trade credit insurance, so many of these other considerations that do come up. Is getting paid a relatively straightforward process in Colombia? And are there any considerations, special considerations people should have in mind?
I wouldn't say anything particular. The only thing is dealing with the local currency, the Colombian peso. There is an exchange rate risk. The pound's strengthened about 30–40% against the peso in the last 18 months. So British goods are expensive, and traditionally, I think, Colombian consumers, distributors, agents have found British product quite expensive, and that's becoming a challenge again now with the exchange rate and the strength of the pound against emerging market currencies.
Yes.
However, in Colombia, you have a very well established of international banks. We don't have a British high street bank here, but HSBC are here in terms of corporate banking. We've got Banco Santander, BBVA from Spain, Citibank. And the normal payment instruments are used, letters of credit are quite often used, or direct payments. And we've certainly seen that things work well in terms of payment. Customs regulation, and exchange rate, I wouldn't call them controls. You've got to do a lot of reporting. There's a lot of paperwork in Colombia, which means that the British Chambers of Commerce, their export documentation teams are really vital to use their knowledge about making sure you get the paperwork right for Colombia, and we can provide local support on that as well. So I wouldn't say payment is as much of a problem as getting goods through customs and cleared quickly and effectively, and the internal transport infrastructure isn't as good as it could be. So
it's really important to use. Sorry, as you say, it's really important to use your accredited chamber back here in the UK to make sure you've got your documentation in order before shipping into the Colombian market.
And also, what's interesting, UK Export Finance are reinvigorated and have quite a large appetite for providing export finance support to Colombia as a market, which wasn't really the case 10 or 15 years ago. And so there's a number of products they have to support the larger and the more small and medium-sized company. And I think credit sort of insurance is becoming more accessible for Colombia if that's an approach that exporters would like to take.
Great. So there's lots of different ways in order to get into the market and to ensure that you minimize some of those risks. You mentioned also, Andrew, the exchange rate risk, which comes with the volatility of an emerging market currency. And one of the other things that accredited chambers are able to offer here in the UK is a chamber foreign exchange hedging service to deliver a little bit more certainty, again, alongside that customs documentation we referred to earlier, so that when in fact you get into the Colombian market, you can do so with a little bit more stability.
Most business is done in US dollars, to be honest. There's not much trading the pound sterling locally, so most exporters are familiar with that, and generally price lists are best received in dollars rather than pounds.
Great, so that exporters from this end can effectively try to do their hedging between the pound-dollar exchange rate and not worry so much about the peso.
Yes.
Excellent. Andrew, if there were some final parting shots that you would put forward for a small or medium-sized British company considering Colombia, for whom Colombia perhaps is the undiscovered country, as they say, what would those parting shots be?
I think based on experience and SMEs and MSBs, however you phrase small and medium-sized businesses, the proof is actually in the pudding. Coming to the market. We've undertaken about 8 trade missions into Colombia over the last 18 months, and every single person who's come has been blown away, as you were, in terms of the openness and proactiveness of doing business and the opportunities that are here. So my biggest message would be give it a try. Come out either in one of the structured trade missions that we work with the UK, or we'd be more than happy to receive companies on an individual basis and provide them support. And yeah, I think the title of the webinar series, Discover, is really appropriate to Colombia. In terms of tourism, Colombia is becoming one of the most desirable locations on the map, and I think that's a fair reflection of the attractiveness and the security that now exists in Colombia as a market.
Brilliant. Andrew, thank you very much for that, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for coming along with us on this journey to discover Colombia today. Before I close, I just wanted to point out a couple of things. If you are here in the UK and you're interested both in what's going on in Colombia and what's going on in markets across the world, some of these emerging markets in particular that you may not have done business in previously but have aspirations to do business with, please do remember the British Chambers of Commerce 2015 International Trade Conference taking place on the 3rd of November here in London. You can find out more on the conference and indeed on all of the offer that we have in global markets from our Export Britain website, www.exportbritain.org.uk. And if you need Andrew's contact details, or indeed those of colleagues in 40 markets literally right across the world where we're now working to build up the BCC Global Business Network, Export Britain is the place to find them. That leaves me, ladies and gentlemen, just to say thank you very much for watching today. We are excited that you've come to discover Colombia with us. I hope that you get the chance to do business in Colombia and discover it for yourselves very soon. I'm Adam Marshall. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, and goodbye.